Good morning again, coffee chat friends. Last night we had another coffee chat here in Saskatoon, and our topic was on emotions. Wasn't sure what kind of response we'd get to this. It was a bit of an uncertainty, but that's okay. We had a fairly good turnout. I think we were 17 at one point during the meeting anyway. And we had a great discussion. It was a little bit different. Because it was a smaller group, we didn't have to break up into smaller groups as well, which is good in a way because everybody could be involved in everything that was going on. It was different in some ways. Normally we go around the room and do a little introduction and a comment on what the topic is. I'm not sure if there was uncertainty in how to approach this topic or what it was, but we went around and people just basically said their name. There was very little topic discussion at all in our roundtable initial. So I basically, when I came around to my turn, I said, my name is Steve and I'm long-winded. So I gave a little bit of my comment that I had drawn up here in this little mind map as to what I think about emotions and the importance of them. I basically started out by saying that, in my perspective, from what I can see, looking at the human being in the here and now, here on planet Earth, individually, we have really at least it seems like we have at least three aspects to ourselves, almost like a holy trinity of ourselves. We can say that we have a physical body. There's not much argument there. We have mind, or mental aspect anyways, and we can sense it, we can actually create thoughts and hear thoughts. But we also have emotions, or how we feel about life. And I would say that the body's results are actions, like physical actions, and the mind's result is thoughts, and the emotions result is the feelings or our quality of life, how we experience life. And I think, to me, this comes right to the idea of health. Health means wholeness, if we look at its origin. So in order to be whole, to be complete in our experience of life, it's great to be able to address all three of these aspects of ourselves and not to let one dominate over the other. And I think there has been a lot given to the idea of physical health, of course. We have physiologists and physicians and, lots of experts who study the body and what the body is made up of and how it functions and so on. Likewise, we have a fair bit of study of mind, though it's not as understood probably as body. In fact, we even have a whole section of health now called section of health called mental health. I don't know, though, but having said that, I'll get to that point later, that there is some study into emotions, of course, but it doesn't seem to be as much emphasis on emotions. But if there's three aspects to ourselves, surely it's very important, right? I would say, though, that unlike thoughts and actions, the mental aspect, the physical aspect, emotions themselves are not as easily pursued in and of themselves, because I think there is kind of a hierarchy. I see it as kind of like mind, and then physical, and then emotions are the experience of how that works. So in other words, it's sort of like along the lines of what Viktor Frankl talked about in his book Man's Search for Meaning. He was referring to happiness, and happiness, we could say, is an emotion, it's a quality of life. He saw that happiness was kind of like what people really want in life. They, in spite of underneath everything that they're doing, they really want happiness, or some version of that. But the happiness cannot be pursued in and of itself. In other words, it's the result of how we live our lives. So, and how we live our lives it has to do with what do we think, what do we spend our time on, what do we think about, who do we associate with, all this sort of thing, which results then in our actions, and the result of our actions is a quality of life, which may result in happiness, it may result in love, it may result in anger, and different qualities of life like that. Now, I'd also say that many people either are expressive of their emotions or not expressive of their emotions, but nevertheless they're there, and we all experience them. I'm not sure what to take for that. It's just, I think it has to do a lot with personality traits and upbringings. Whether some people are more emotional or less emotional. But I don't know. I'm just commenting on an observation. I would also say that emotions, I wouldn't say are meant to run our lives. Remember what I mentioned in the beginning, that the three aspects, body, mind, and emotions, in the same way that our physical urges, it's not best to let them run our lives. Otherwise, we'll just do whatever we want to do that feels physically pleasurable or whatever. And the same way that, just any old thought running through our consciousness, we don't just act on it. We can make decisions behind that. Same way with emotions. We don't just do things because they feel good necessarily. I would say that what's important in terms of the holistic approach to this is to have each of our three aspects cross-check each other, and then to have it all backed up by what we feel is best in terms of what do we find our purpose in life. And what I mean by that is, if we can develop some sort of a foundational constitution of morality, let's say, that we feel is best for us in terms of our physical health. So therefore, if behaving in a certain way can be harmful to the body, that would contradict our constitutional morality of what's right. If we were to involve ourselves in depraved thoughts, then we could realize that is contrary to our constitutional morality, and therefore it's wrong for us. In the same way with our emotions, if we find that being in a certain state of anger or despair or these sorts of things is unhealthy, because and it's contrary to how we feel we're purposefully meant to live, then we surely can change. We can change what we pay attention to, and therefore our thoughts will change. We can change who we hang around with, and therefore we get different influences. We can change what we read, what we listen to. People there at the meeting talked about turning the news off, for example, if that's harmful to us. So we can change the input. And somebody there actually mentioned how if we begin to change our beliefs, then we can change the way we think. And there was something else in there too. Anyways, we change our beliefs, which I would call more like the foundation. And if it's built upon, if those beliefs are built upon a rational cross-check with what makes sense and what feels right as well. So it's not just feel right, but it also makes sense. So there's a cross-reference check as we develop that and as we grow it. And it's not just what somebody else told us to. It's got to resonate inside of us in terms of our rationality and what feels right as well. So I would say to end this, that I know it wasn't just about emotions I was talking about here, but if we realize that we have three aspects of ourselves, at least, we have that mental aspect, we have that physical aspect, we have that emotional aspect, then surely it's important, because if it's there for a reason. And when we can live with the awareness of all of the importance of the health within all of these, then we can be holistically more healthy. We can be more healthy. When we're more healthy with ourselves, certainly we can be more healthy for others as well. And the only way we're going to be the most effective in the world is that we're as healthy as we can be. Now, the reason I did it in that order, mentioning what I said, is because we didn't have any real comments before that. But now I'll just go into just a few things, because we had actually a great 2-hour discussion almost afterwards, and an hour and a half, and there were a lot of topics discussed, which unfortunately I wasn't able to write them all down, but there was a few things that popped up at me in response to my comment that there's not a lot of study into the emotions as there is into physical, especially, and mental. One gentleman there, he said that there is something called EQ, or emotional intelligence, which is gaining favor in workplaces, as opposed to just looking at somebody's IQ, or intelligence. There's also the emotional that's being looked at now too, because if we're mental scatterbrains, we're not effective, but also if we're emotional scatterbrains or scatter emotions, we're not effective as well. So if we can learn how to be more effective with our emotions and more as we have learned to be more effective with our intelligence, then we can be more effective in life. There was a lady there who mentioned something about emotional causes, and she had a list of a whole bunch of things. One was, I think, cognitive errors, but I didn't get them all. I hope to get them for the write-up of this, so they'll be in the write-up, and I can list them. And there was some good stuff there, but there was too much to take in all at once. There was one guy mentioned something about a country that finds that rather than just gross domestic product as an important measurement of the advancement of the society, they have the idea of gross domestic happiness, which is maybe even more important, because it doesn't matter how much we have. If we're miserable, then we don't really have anything, do we? If as Viktor Frankl says, if our primary goal in life is to be happy, then that's a good measurement to take as to how we're doing. A health check, basically, right? So gross domestic happiness, I kind of like that idea. Somebody mentioned there that emotions are a survival mechanism, and I would certainly say in many ways I agree with that, because if they are a signal or the measurement of our quality of life, well, you can see that as a feedback loop, right? If we're feeling down all the time, then the impetus or the motivation is for us to change, which would grow our quality of life experience and then benefit us. And we know pretty solidly now that if our emotions are in the gutter all the time, it affects us mentally, and it affects us as a feedback, even though they're the result of how we've lived our lives. When we get into that gutter as the result of living our lives, it actually causes a feedback again to cause more of the input, which pushes us even farther down. So it would be like a survival mechanism in that case. Somebody mentioned talking about gratitude, and that helps us with our emotions. There was a book mentioned, I didn't get the author, but it's called Happiness for No Reason. Another book called What Happy People Know. Once again, no author, but you can probably Google that one. Somebody mentioned that negative emotions can be important as a learning opportunity in terms of what are our emotions, what are our motivations, and that makes a lot of sense for sure, as long as we're aware of it, right? Otherwise, it just can drive us further down. What else? We talked about relationships too, in terms of the importance of that, and in terms of interhuman relationships, and also the relationship with many people have with a god or a god deity, and how when that experience is personalized rather than generalized, it actually affects the quality of life. I pointed out that I noticed that many Christians who have a close personal relationship with their God, it results in them being happier people. Somebody mentioned that this may just be a symptom of ignorance is bliss, and maybe it is, because after all, who knows what a God really is? But if they're honest, I mean, we don't. If the idea of this infinite creator, I mean, obviously, if we can't understand infinity, we can't understand God. But nevertheless, a personal construct of that, because the way we got going on this was this lady talked about herself having several horses as personalities in a way, or phantom identities, which she had a relationship with. And so many of us, if we're honest, we've had that before. We've had internal conversations with with another imagined entity. Now, one of the challenges with interpersonal relationships is they're never perfect, right? Because people can cheat us, rip us off, lie to us, all kinds of stuff, and it can shatter our trust in a relationship. But when we have a relationship with a deity, a personal deity, or whatever it is, which is constructed as perfect and all loving and so on, then there is this comfort that we can go to. And once again, some people say that this is about ignorance being bliss, but nevertheless, it can be very effective in us achieving an emotional feel of happiness and contentedness and this sort of thing. And it's like a what do you call it? It's like a gentle harbor in a storm sometimes, as long as it doesn't result in us thinking that somehow that's a complete panacea and that we have no responsibility then to, affect change in our lives. As long as that's not the case, then it can be very effective, or it seems to be very effective. And that kind of descended into a conversation about delusion, that it was the effect of delusion, because it seems like it's almost delusional, some of these ways that we affect our lives. But yet, it was pointed out that some of the great inventors of the world, some of the great writers and people we look up to as great in terms of what they've been able to do and affect in the world, at the time they were considered delusional, and times maybe, locked up and hung off the stakes and all kinds of stuff, because they were considered like idiots by the mainstream of the time. So I guess this whole emotional thing being very elusive, we use all kinds of methods because deep down inside of us, we want to have a higher quality of life. And in the end, it's what works to help improve ourselves. If it works. If it's a placebo sometimes, but it works, then maybe we can learn something. Maybe we can learn something that we can use the placebo, or we don't have to use a placebo, or whatever. But nevertheless, I think it was a great chat overall, because we were able to see that, we were able to all agree that emotions are important. And I think for the most part we agreed that we can affect our emotions. We can affect our emotions by how we affect our mind, and how who we decide to hang out with, what we want to read, our actions we take, and so on. And it can make an effect. I don't think we completely agreed that we have this infinite ability to affect a change right in the moment or whatever, and I don't think that was the point. But nevertheless, I think we all agreed that we can make steps to improve the quality of our lives by improving our emotional experience in life. It's great chatting with you all, and I'll talk to you in a couple weeks probably. Bye-bye for now.